Welcome to Bedtime Express, your nightly journey to peaceful sleep. Tonight, we'll follow young Thomas, a medieval apprentice discovering the gentle rhythms of guild life. You'll experience his daily adventures in carpentry, friendship, and learning in a soothing story perfect for bedtime. Before you fall asleep, please help Bedtime Express to reach more people by liking this video. I also want to know more about you, so write in the comments from where you are joining this journey. Of course, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful bedtime stories. Now, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let yourself relax as we begin this calming tale. Sweet dreams await. The daily life of a young apprentice in a medieval guild. In the quiet cobblestone streets of Millbrook, a small medieval town nestled between rolling green hills and a babbling brook, the first rays of sunrise painted the timber-framed houses in gentle golden hues. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the scent of morning dew and the distant aroma of freshly baked bread from the baker's guild. Birds chirped softly from their perches on the thatched roofs, welcoming another peaceful day in this charming medieval world. Young Thomas Whitewood stirred in his small but cozy bed in the loft above Master Edmund's carpentry workshop. At 14 years old, Thomas had been apprenticed to the Carpenters' Guild for just over a year now, and each morning brought new adventures and lessons. His straw mattress rustled softly as he stretched his arms and yawned, rubbing the sleep from his bright blue eyes. The wooden beams above his head were familiar friends now, each knot and grain pattern as known to him as the lines on his own palm. The gentle sound of Master Edmund moving about below told Thomas it was time to begin another day. He could hear the soft scraping of tools being arranged and the creak of the workshop door opening to let in the morning air. Thomas smiled sleepily, knowing that his master was already preparing for the day's work, with the same careful attention he brought to every piece of wood that passed through their shop. Thomas swung his legs over the side of his simple wooden bed and placed his feet on the smooth planks of the loft floor. His morning routine was as comfortable as an old song. First, he would splash cool water from the ceramic basin on his face, then dress in his sturdy woolen tunic and leather breeches. The clothes were practical and well made, gifts from the guild when he had first arrived as a nervous young boy from the countryside. As he pulled on his soft leather boots, Thomas remembered his first day at the workshop. He had been so frightened and overwhelmed by all the new sights, sounds, and smells. The workshop had seemed enormous then, filled with mysterious tools and half-finished projects that looked impossibly complex. Now, after more than a year of patient learning, he could identify every tool by touch alone and understood the purpose of each piece of wood stacked along the walls. The ladder down to the workshop creaked softly under his weight as Thomas descended, each rung worn smooth by countless trips up and down. Master Edmund looked up from where he was examining a piece of oak his kind brown eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled at his young apprentice. Edmund was a man of medium height, with gentle hands that could coax the most beautiful shapes from even the most stubborn piece of timber. His brown hair was streaked with silver, and his beard was always neatly trimmed, befitting a master craftsman of his standing in the guild. "Good morning, Thomas," Master Edmund said warmly, his voice carrying the soft accent of the local region. "I trust you slept well? We have an interesting day ahead of us. Master Geoffrey from the Stonemasons Guild has commissioned a special project that will require some of our finest work." Thomas's eyes lit up with curiosity and excitement. Special projects were always the most rewarding part of his apprenticeship, as they challenged him to use all the skills he had learned in new and creative ways. "What kind of project, Master?" he asked eagerly, already moving toward the tool rack to begin preparing for the day's work. "Patience, my young friend," Edmund chuckled softly. "First, we must tend to our morning tasks. The wood must be checked for any changes from the night's humidity. Our tools must be properly prepared, and we must break our fast before beginning any serious work. A craftsman who rushes is a craftsman who makes mistakes, and mistakes can be costly both in materials and in reputation." Thomas nodded, understanding the wisdom in his master's words. He had learned this lesson several times during his apprenticeship, usually through small mistakes that Master Edmund had patiently helped him correct. The guild had taught him that true craftsmanship required not just skill with tools, but also patience, planning, and attention to detail. Together, they began their morning inspection of the workshop. Thomas had learned to look for signs of warping in the stored wood caused by changes in temperature and humidity during the night. He ran his hands along the boards, feeling for any irregularities, while Master Edmund checked the more valuable pieces of imported timber. The workshop smelled wonderfully of different types of wood, the sweet scent of cherry, the rich aroma of walnut, and the clean, fresh smell of newly cut pine. "Feel this piece of maple, Thomas," Master Edmund called softly, guiding his apprentice's hand to a beautiful board with intricate grain patterns. "Can you sense how the wood feels different this morning? The cool, damp air has made it expand slightly. We'll need to let it adjust to the workshop temperature before we can use it for any precision work." Thomas pressed his palm against the smooth surface of the maple, concentrating on the subtle sensations. At first, he couldn't feel anything unusual, but gradually he began to notice a very slight change in the wood's texture compared to how he remembered it from the previous evening. "I think I can feel it, Master," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder at this new discovery. "It's like the wood is alive and breathing." "That's exactly right, Thomas," Master Edmund replied with obvious pride in his student's growing understanding. "Wood is indeed alive in its own way, even after it's been cut and seasoned. It continues to respond to its environment, expanding and contracting with changes in humidity and temperature. A skilled carpenter learns to work with these natural movements rather than fighting against them. As they continued their morning inspection, Thomas felt a deep sense of contentment settling over him. There was something profoundly peaceful about starting each day with this careful, methodical examination of their materials and tools. It was like a gentle meditation that prepared both mind and body for the creative work that would follow. The workshop felt like a sanctuary, protected from the rushing pace of the outside world by walls filled with the accumulated wisdom of generations of craftsmen. The sound of church bells echoing across the town square reminded them that it was time for the morning meal. Master Edmund's wife, Goodwife Margaret, would have prepared breakfast in their cozy kitchen adjacent to the workshop. She was a kind woman with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile who always made sure Thomas felt like part of the family. Her cooking was simple but nourishing: fresh bread, creamy butter, honey from their own beehives, and milk from their goat, Primrose. As they walked toward the kitchen, Thomas noticed how the morning light was beginning to stream through the workshop windows, illuminating tiny particles of sawdust that danced in the air like fairy dust. The light transformed the ordinary workshop into something magical, highlighting the beautiful grain patterns in the wood and casting interesting shadows from the hanging tools. He paused for a moment to appreciate this daily transformation, feeling grateful for the opportunity to witness such simple beauty. "Come along, Thomas," Master Edmund called gently from the kitchen doorway. "Goodwife Margaret has prepared something special for us this morning, and we'll need our strength for the challenging work ahead." After a hearty breakfast of warm porridge sweetened with honey, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and cool milk that tasted of spring meadows, Thomas felt ready to tackle whatever challenges the day might bring. Goodwife Margaret had packed extra bread and cheese for their midday meal, wrapping it carefully in clean linen and placing it in Thomas's leather satchel along with a small flask of sweet apple cider. She always worried that he might not eat enough during his long days of physical work, and her motherly care reminded Thomas of his own family back in the countryside. Returning to the workshop, Master Edmund finally revealed the nature of their special project. "Master Geoffrey has commissioned us to create a series of decorative wooden panels for the new chapel being built by the Stonemasons' Guild," he explained, unrolling a piece of parchment covered with detailed drawings. "These panels will feature intricate carvings of woodland scenes, trees, birds, flowers, and small forest creatures. It's an honor to be chosen for such an important project, as the chapel will stand for many generations to come." Thomas studied the drawings with wide eyes, marveling at the complexity and beauty of the designs. Each panel told a different part of a larger story about the harmony between humans and nature. One showed a family of deer drinking from a crystal-clear stream, while another depicted songbirds building their nests in the branches of an ancient oak tree. The level of detail required would challenge every skill Thomas had learned during his apprenticeship, "Will I be able to help with the carving, Master?" Thomas asked hopefully, though he tried to keep his voice calm and respectful. He had been practicing his carving skills on small practice pieces, but he had never worked on anything as important as a commission for a chapel. Master Edmund smiled at his apprentice's enthusiasm while considering the question carefully. "You have shown great improvement in your carving technique, Thomas," he said thoughtfully. "I believe you are ready to work on some of the simpler elements, perhaps the leaves and smaller branches. But first, we must prepare our wood and plan our approach. Even the most skilled carver cannot succeed without proper preparation." They spent the next hour selecting the perfect pieces of wood for the project. Master Edmund taught Thomas to look not just at the surface of each board, but to imagine how the grain patterns would enhance or detract from the planned carvings. "See how this piece of cherry has a natural swirl in the grain?" Edmund pointed out, tracing the pattern with his finger. "If we position it correctly, that swirl could become part of a bird's wing or the curve of a flower petal." Thomas was fascinated by this deeper level of planning. He had learned to choose wood based on its structural properties, strength, flexibility, and freedom from defects. But now he was beginning to understand how a master craftsman could use the wood's natural beauty as an integral part of the design. It was like solving a complex puzzle where every piece had to fit perfectly, not just in terms of size and shape, but also in terms of visual harmony. Once they had selected their materials, it was time to prepare the carving tools. Master Edmund opened a special wooden case that Thomas had only seen a few times before, revealing a collection of carving chisels that gleamed like jewels in the morning light. Each tool was perfectly maintained, with edges so sharp they could slice through wood fibers like a hot knife through butter. The handles were worn smooth by years of use, shaped to fit perfectly in a craftsman's hand. The relationship between a carver and his tools is sacred, Master Edmund explained as he began the careful process of checking each blade's sharpness. These tools were made by Master Robert of the Blacksmith's Guild, and they have served me faithfully for more than 20 years. With proper care, they will outlive both you and me, perhaps serving apprentices not yet born. Thomas watched intently as his master demonstrated the proper technique for testing a blade's sharpness. "Never test the edge with your finger," Edmund cautioned. "Instead, try to shave a thin curl from this piece of pine. A properly sharpened chisel should be able to remove a shaving so thin you can see through it." The demonstration was mesmerizing. Master Edmund held the chisel at just the right angle and applied gentle, controlled pressure. A gossamer thin shaving of pine curled away from the blade, so delicate it seemed to float in the air before drifting to the workshop floor. Thomas had seen this done many times before, but he never ceased to be amazed by the precision and control it required. "Now you try," Master Edmund said, handing Thomas a smaller chisel designed for detail work. "Remember, let the tool do the work. Your job is simply to guide it with steady hands and clear intentions." Thomas took the chisel with reverent care, feeling the smooth weight of the handle in his palm. He positioned the blade against the practice piece and tried to duplicate his master's technique. His first attempt produced a thick, uneven shaving that bore little resemblance to Edmund's gossamer curl. But instead of being disappointed, Thomas felt excited by the challenge ahead. "Better," Master Edmund nodded encouragingly. "Your grip is improving, and your angle was nearly correct. Try again, but this time imagine you are peeling the skin from a ripe apple. Gentle pressure, smooth movement, complete control." Thomas's second attempt was indeed better, producing a thinner, more even shaving. By his fifth try, he managed to create a shaving thin enough to see through, though it wasn't quite as perfect as his master's demonstration. The sense of accomplishment he felt was tremendous, like solving a puzzle that had been bothering him for weeks. "Excellent progress," Master Edmund praised. "Now, let us begin work on your first contribution to the chapel panels. I want you to carve a series of oak leaves for this corner section. Start with the outline, and remember, it's always easier to remove more wood than it is to add wood back." Thomas approached his assigned section with a mixture of excitement and nervous concentration. He had drawn oak leaves many times during his artistic studies, and he had carved practice leaves on scrap wood, but this was different. This carving would become part of a sacred space where people would come to pray and find peace for generations to come. He began with light, tentative cuts, gradually defining the outline of the first leaf. The cherry wood responded beautifully to his chisel, its fine grain allowing for precise detail work. As his confidence grew, Thomas found himself entering a state of focused calm that he had learned to recognize as the mark of true craftsmanship. Time seemed to slow down, and the world outside the workshop faded away until there was nothing but the wood, the tool, and the emerging form of the leaf. Master Edmund worked quietly nearby, occasionally offering gentle guidance or pointing out areas where Thomas's technique could be improved. But for the most part, he allowed his apprentice to discover the rhythms and requirements of the work through direct experience. This was the ancient way of learning, passed down through countless generations of craftsmen, not through lengthy explanations, but through patient practice under the watchful eye of a master. As the morning progressed, Thomas's first leaf began to take shape. He carved the distinctive lobed edges that made oak leaves recognizable, then began adding the delicate network of veins that would give the carving life and movement. Each vein required careful planning and precise execution, as one mistake could ruin hours of work. Remember to vary the depth of your cuts, Master Edmund advised during one of his periodic checks on Thomas's progress. Real leaves are not flat, they curve and twist, catching light and shadow in different ways. Your carving should capture some of that natural movement. Thomas nodded and began experimenting with different depths and angles in his cuts. Gradually, his flat leaf began to acquire a sense of three-dimensional form. Some areas receded into shadow while others caught the light, creating the illusion that the wooden leaf might rustle in an unfelt breeze. The transformation was magical, and Thomas felt a deep sense of satisfaction at bringing life to what had been a simple piece of wood. The sound of the noon bells from the town square reminded them that the morning had passed more quickly than either had realized. Thomas looked up from his work with surprise, feeling as though he had been carving for only a few minutes. This was another sign of true engagement with his craft. When he was completely absorbed in his work, time seemed to become irrelevant. "Shall we break for our midday meal?" Master Edmund suggested, carefully setting down his own chisel and stretching his back. "The afternoon light will be better for detail work anyway, and our hands could use a rest." Thomas carefully cleaned his chisel and set it in its proper place in the tool rack. He had learned never to leave tools lying about, both for safety reasons and out of respect for the tools that made his craft possible. As he washed the wood dust from his hands in the basin by the window, he felt a quiet pride in the morning's accomplishment. His first oak leaf wasn't perfect, but it was recognizably an oak leaf, and more importantly, it was his own work. The midday break was one of Thomas's favorite times of the day, not just for the welcome rest and nourishment, but for the opportunity to connect with other members of the guild community. As he and Master Edmund walked through the cobblestone streets toward the guild hall, Thomas observed the bustling activity of the town during its busiest hours. Merchants called out their wares, children played games in the narrow alleyways, and craftsmen from various guilds moved about their business with the confident stride of people who knew their place in the world. The Carpenters' Guild Hall was a magnificent building that served as both a meeting place and a symbol of the guild's importance in the community. Built of local stone with beautiful wooden details created by generations of guild members, it stood as a testament to the skill and dedication of the craftsmen who called it home. The great wooden doors were carved with intricate scenes depicting the history of carpentry, from simple tool-making to the construction of great cathedrals. Inside the hall, The noon meal was a time of fellowship and learning. Long wooden tables, polished smooth by countless gatherings, accommodated masters, journeymen, and apprentices together. The arrangement was not random. Younger apprentices sat near their masters, while more advanced students might find themselves in conversation with journeymen who could share experiences from their travels to distant towns and cities. Thomas took his usual place beside Master Edmund, but today he noticed that Master Geoffrey from the Stonemasons' Guild had joined them. Geoffrey was a robust man with hands permanently stained by stone dust and eyes that seemed to see the potential in every raw block of marble or granite. His presence at their table meant that the chapel project was indeed significant, important enough to warrant personal attention from the client. "Young Thomas," Master Geoffrey said warmly, "Master Edmund tells me you're contributing to our chapel panels. That's quite an honor for an apprentice in his second year. I'm eager to see how your oak leaves complement the stone carvings we're planning for the altar area." Thomas felt his cheeks warm with pride and a touch of nervousness. "I'm doing my best to make them worthy of such an important project, Master Geoffrey," he replied respectfully. "Master Edmund has taught me that every piece of a larger work must be perfect, or the whole suffers." "Wise words," Geoffrey nodded approvingly. "The same principle applies to stonework. In fact, it applies to our entire community. Each guild, each craftsman, each apprentice contributes to the strength and beauty of our town. When we all do our work with care and dedication, the result is something greater than any of us could achieve alone." This conversation sparked a broader discussion about the interconnected nature of the various guilds. Master Edmund explained how the carpenters relied on the blacksmiths for their tools, while the blacksmiths needed the carpenters to build their workshops and provide charcoal for their forges. The weavers created the cloth that protected everyone's work clothes, while the tanners provided the leather for tool handles and protective aprons. "It's like a great wheel," said Master William, an elderly carpenter whose gnarled hands spoke of decades of skilled work. "Each guild is a spoke, and if any spoke fails, the whole wheel becomes unstable. That's why we must all support each other, sharing knowledge and resources when needed." Thomas listened intently to these discussions, understanding that he was learning not just about carpentry, but about his place in a larger community. The guild system wasn't just about organizing craftsmen. It was about creating a society where everyone had value, everyone had a role to play, and everyone could take pride in their contribution to the common good. The meal itself was simple but satisfying. Fresh bread from the Baker's Guild, cheese from the local dairy, vegetables from the market gardens surrounding the town, and ale brewed by Master Peter, whose small brewery was famous throughout the region. Everything they ate represented the work of their neighbors and fellow guild members, making each bite a reminder of their interconnectedness. As they prepared to return to work, Master Edmund introduced Thomas to young Peter, an apprentice blacksmith who was about the same age. Peter's arms were already developing the muscular build that came from working with heavy hammers and anvils, and his hands were permanently marked by small burns from flying sparks. Despite the physical demands of his trade, he had a cheerful disposition and bright, intelligent eyes. "Perhaps you two could walk back together," Master Edmund suggested. "It would be good for Thomas to learn more about how your guilds work together, Peter. And Thomas might be able to explain some of the finer points of woodworking that could help you in your tool making." The two young apprentices set off through the winding streets, immediately falling into easy conversation. Peter was fascinated by the precision required for fine carving work, while Thomas was amazed by the strength and heat tolerance needed for blacksmithing. They discovered that despite the differences in their trades, they faced many similar challenges as apprentices: the need to balance confidence with humility, the importance of learning from mistakes, and the satisfaction that came from gradually mastering difficult skills. "Do you ever worry about making mistakes on important projects?" Thomas asked, as they paused to watch a group of children playing with wooden hoops in a small square. "All the time," Peter admitted with a laugh. "Just last week, I was working on a commission for Master Harold, a special set of carving chisels like the ones you use. I got distracted thinking about something else and overheated one of the blades during the tempering process. It took me an extra day to fix my mistake, and Master Harold was very patient about explaining what went wrong." Thomas felt relief at hearing that he wasn't the only one who sometimes struggled with the pressure of important work. "Master Edmund always says that mistakes are part of learning, but it's still nerve-wracking when you're working on something that really matters." "That's exactly right," Peter agreed. "But I've noticed that the more I worry about making mistakes, the more likely I am to actually make them. The best work happens when I can relax and trust in my training. It's like Master Harold says, the hand follows the mind, but the mind must be calm for the hand to be steady." As they approached the carpenter's workshop, Thomas felt grateful for this new friendship. Having someone his own age who understood the challenges of apprenticeship made him feel less alone in his journey toward mastery. He realized that the guild system provided not just professional training, but also a network of relationships that would support him throughout his career. Back in the workshop, the afternoon light was indeed perfect for detail work, streaming through the windows at just the right angle to illuminate the fine textures Thomas was creating in his oak leaves. He returned to his carving with renewed energy and confidence, applying the morning's lessons while experimenting with new techniques he had been thinking about during the meal break. Master Edmund worked nearby on the more complex elements of the panel, occasionally humming softly to himself as he carved intricate details into the bark of a mighty oak tree that would serve as the centerpiece of the composition. His humming created a peaceful atmosphere that helped Thomas maintain his focus, while also reminding him that craftsmanship should be a source of joy, not just a source of stress. As the afternoon progressed, Thomas found himself entering that same state of focused calm he had experienced in the morning. His movements became more fluid and confident, his cuts more precise and deliberate. The second and third oak leaves came together more quickly than the first, as his hands learned to work in harmony with his eyes and his understanding of the wood's properties. "Your technique is improving remarkably," Master Edmund observed during one of his periodic inspections. "See how much more natural this third leaf looks compared to your first? You are beginning to understand that carving is not about imposing your will on the wood, but about discovering the forms that already exist within it." Thomas paused to compare his 3 leaves, and he could indeed see the progression in his skill. The first leaf, while recognizable, had a somewhat stiff and artificial appearance. The second showed more natural curves and variations in depth. The third leaf seemed to have grown from the wood itself, with subtle asymmetries and imperfections that made it look alive. "I think I'm beginning to understand what you mean about listening to the wood," Thomas said thoughtfully. "It's like the grain patterns are suggesting where the cuts should go." "Exactly." Master Edmund smiled with obvious pride in his student's growing insight. "A master craftsman learns to work with the natural properties of his materials rather than fighting against them. This is true whether you're working with wood, stone, metal, or any other material. The material itself becomes your partner in the creative process." The afternoon passed peacefully in this way, with periods of intense concentration interspersed with moments of instruction and reflection. Thomas completed 6 oak leaves of increasing quality and began work on a small section of bark texture that would connect his leaves to Master Edmund's central tree. Each new challenge built upon the skills he had learned earlier, creating a sense of steady progress that was deeply satisfying. As the light began to fade and the shadows grew longer across the workshop floor, Thomas realized that this had been one of the most fulfilling days of his apprenticeship. He had not only advanced his technical skills but also gained a deeper understanding of his place in the community and his role as a future master craftsman. The combination of focused work, community fellowship, and personal growth made him feel grateful for the path he had chosen. As evening approached and the workshop gradually fell into the gentle shadows of twilight, Thomas and Master Edmund began the important ritual of cleaning and organizing their workspace. This was not merely a practical necessity, but a sacred tradition that connected them to generations of craftsmen who had followed the same routines. Every tool had its proper place, every surface needed to be swept clean, and every piece of work had to be safely stored away from dust and moisture. Thomas had learned that the condition of a craftsman's workshop reflected the quality of his character. A disorganized workspace led to lost tools, damaged materials, and inferior work. More importantly, the daily practice of maintaining order and cleanliness developed habits of mind that carried over into every aspect of the craftsman's work. A clean workshop is the foundation of clean thinking, Master Edmund often said, and Thomas was beginning to understand the deeper truth in these words. As they worked together to return the workshop to its pristine evening state, Master Edmund began sharing stories of his own apprenticeship many years ago. These evening stories had become one of Thomas's favorite parts of each day, as they provided not just entertainment, but wisdom and perspective that could only come from years of experience. "When I was about your age," Master Edmund began as he carefully wrapped his finest chisels in soft leather pouches, "I worked for Master Richard, who was known throughout the region for his furniture making. One day, a wealthy merchant commissioned an elaborate dining table that was to be the centerpiece of his great hall. Master Richard spent weeks selecting the perfect piece of walnut and planning every detail of the design." Thomas paused in his sweeping to listen more carefully, sensing that this story carried an important lesson. The workshop had grown quiet except for the soft sounds of their cleaning and the distant calls of evening birds settling into their roosts. "I was assigned to work on the table legs," Master Edmund continued, "which required very precise joinery to ensure the table would be both beautiful and stable. I was so eager to impress my master and the client that I rushed through the preliminary steps, thinking I could make up time by working faster on the final assembly." Master Edmund paused in his work and looked directly at Thomas, his eyes reflecting the wisdom that comes from hard-learned lessons. Can you guess what happened next? Thomas thought for a moment, considering what he had learned about the importance of patience and proper preparation. "Did the joints not fit properly?" he ventured. "Worse than that," Master Edmund replied with a rueful smile. "The joints fit, but they weren't cut with sufficient precision. When we assembled the table, it wobbled terribly. The merchant was coming to inspect the work the next day, and there was no time to start over. Master Richard had to work through the entire night, carefully adjusting each joint until the table was perfectly stable." Thomas winced in sympathy, imagining how terrible his master must have felt watching Master Richard work through the night to fix his mistakes. "What did Master Richard say to you?" he asked quietly. "He could have been angry, and he would have had every right to be," Master Edmund replied thoughtfully. Instead, he waited until after the merchant had accepted the table and paid for it. Then he sat me down and explained that my eagerness to impress had actually shown disrespect for the client who deserved our best work, disrespect for the beautiful walnut that had taken decades to grow, and disrespect for the traditions of our craft that emphasize patience and precision above speed. The lesson struck Thomas deeply, and he found himself thinking about his own work on the chapel panels. Had he been rushing at any point during the day, eager to show off his skills rather than focusing on doing his best work? He didn't think so, but the story reminded him to examine his motivations carefully. Master Richard taught me that true craftsmanship is not about impressing others, Master Edmund continued as he arranged the last of his tools in their proper places. It's about honoring the materials, respecting the traditions of our guild, and serving the needs of our community. When those are your primary concerns, impressive work follows naturally. As they finished their cleaning tasks, Thomas reflected on how much his understanding of craftsmanship had deepened during his apprenticeship. When he had first arrived at the workshop, he had thought that being a carpenter meant simply knowing how to use tools to shape wood. Now he was beginning to understand that true mastery involved wisdom, patience, humility, and a deep respect for the interconnected web of relationships that made their work possible. The evening meal was a quiet, contemplative affair shared with Master Edmund and goodwife Margaret in their cozy kitchen. The day's work had been satisfying but tiring, and Thomas found himself moving more slowly as his body acknowledged the physical demands of concentrated handwork. Margaret had prepared a hearty stew with vegetables from their garden and tender pieces of mutton that filled the kitchen with a rich, comforting aroma. "How did your carving go today, Thomas?" Margaret asked as she ladled the steaming stew into wooden bowls. She always took a genuine interest in his progress, and her questions helped him reflect on what he had learned. "I think I'm beginning to understand what Master Edmund means about working with the wood instead of fighting against it," Thomas replied thoughtfully. "My last few oak leaves looked much more natural than my first attempts. It's like the wood was guiding my hands once I learned to pay attention to its grain patterns." "That's a wonderful way to put it," Margaret smiled warmly. "It sounds like you're discovering one of the most important secrets of any craft, learning to be a good listener. Whether you're working with wood, tending a garden, or cooking a meal, the materials themselves have much to teach us if we're willing to pay attention." Master Edmund nodded in agreement as he broke off a piece of fresh bread. "Margaret speaks truly. Some of my greatest innovations in technique have come not from forcing new ideas onto the wood, but from observing how the wood wanted to be shaped and finding ways to work with those natural tendencies." After the meal, as was their custom, the three of them spent some time in quiet conversation by the fireplace. This was Thomas's favorite time of day, when the pressures and activities of work gave way to peaceful reflection and the sharing of stories and wisdom. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls and filling the room with warmth and light. Master Edmund pulled out a small piece of boxwood that he had been carving during his leisure hours, a detailed miniature of a songbird that was nearly complete. His hands moved with unconscious precision as he added tiny details to the bird's feathers, working more from memory and muscle memory than from conscious thought. This kind of relaxed, meditative carving helped him unwind from the day's work while maintaining his connection to his craft. "Do you ever carve just for your own pleasure, Master?" Thomas asked, fascinated by the intricate detail emerging from such a small piece of wood. "Oh yes," Master Edmund replied with a gentle smile. "These little projects serve several purposes. They help me experiment with new techniques without risking valuable materials or important commissions. They keep my hands nimble and my eyes sharp. And perhaps most importantly, they remind me why I fell in love with woodworking in the first place." He paused in his carving to look directly at Thomas. "When you work only on commissions and assignments, it's easy to lose sight of the pure joy of creating something beautiful. These personal projects help me remember that our craft is not just a way to earn a living, but a way to bring beauty and meaning into the world." Thomas understood this wisdom intuitively. Even during his short apprenticeship, he had noticed that his best work came when he was genuinely excited about what he was creating, rather than when he was simply trying to complete an assignment correctly. The oak leaves he had carved that afternoon had improved dramatically once he stopped worrying about making mistakes and started enjoying the process of bringing them to life. Margaret looked up from her own handwork. She was embroidering delicate flowers on a linen cloth that would eventually grace their dining table. "The same principle applies to any creative work," she added softly. "When I embroider or tend my garden, the results are always better when I'm working from love rather than from duty. Love brings patience, attention, and a willingness to do whatever is necessary to achieve beauty." As the evening progressed and the fire burned lower, Thomas felt a deep sense of contentment settling over him. The day had been challenging and rewarding in equal measure, filled with learning, growth, and the satisfaction that comes from meaningful work well done. He was surrounded by people who cared about him and supported his development, part of a community that valued skill, wisdom, and mutual support. "I think it's time for us all to seek our rest," Master Edmund said eventually, carefully storing his carving tools and setting the little wooden bird on the mantelpiece where it could catch the morning light. tomorrow will bring new challenges and new opportunities to grow in our understanding of our craft. Thomas climbed the familiar ladder to his loft, his body pleasantly tired from the day's work, and his mind full of new insights and inspiration. As he prepared for sleep, he reviewed the day's lessons, both technical and philosophical. He had learned new carving techniques, gained confidence in his abilities, made a new friend, and deepened his understanding of what it meant to be part of a guild community. But perhaps most importantly, he had begun to understand that true mastery was not just about acquiring skills, but about developing wisdom, patience, and a deep respect for the traditions and relationships that made his work possible. As he drifted off to sleep, Thomas felt grateful for the path he had chosen and excited about the journey that still lay ahead. The soft light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the small window of Thomas's loft when he stirred from his peaceful sleep. His dreams had been filled with images of carved wood coming to life, oak leaves rustling in an unfelt breeze, wooden birds taking flight, and intricate patterns flowing like water across the surface of polished timber. As consciousness returned, Thomas felt a deep sense of anticipation for the day ahead, knowing that he would continue work on the chapel panels that had already taught him so much. The familiar sounds of Master Edmund beginning his morning routine drifted up from the workshop below, but there was something different about this particular morning. Thomas could hear voices, more than just his master's, suggesting that they would have visitors early in the day. Curious and slightly anxious, he dressed quickly and descended the ladder to discover Master Geoffrey from the Stonemasons' Guild, examining the previous day's work with obvious interest and approval. "Ah, Thomas," Master Geoffrey said warmly as the young apprentice appeared, "I was just admiring your oak leaves. Master Edmund tells me this is your first major contribution to a commissioned work, and I must say the quality is remarkable for someone so early in his training." Thomas felt his cheeks warm with pride, but he also remembered Master Edmund's teachings about humility and the importance of giving credit where it was due. "Thank you, Master Geoffrey," he replied respectfully, "but I couldn't have achieved anything without Master Edmund's patient instruction and the wisdom of all the masters who have shared their knowledge with our guild over the generations." Master Geoffrey exchanged a meaningful look with Master Edmund, and both men smiled at the young apprentice's thoughtful response. "Spoken like a true craftsman," Geoffrey said approvingly. "Understanding our debt to those who came before us is the beginning of wisdom in any trade." "In fact," Master Edmund added, "that understanding is one of the reasons Master Geoffrey has come to visit us this morning. He has a proposal that will help you appreciate even more deeply the connections between past, present, and future in our craft." Master Geoffrey nodded and turned to address Thomas directly. The Stonemasons Guild maintains archives that contain records and drawings dating back over 200 years. These documents show how our ancestors approached projects similar to our current chapel commission. Would you be interested in spending part of today studying these historical records? I believe you would find them both fascinating and instructive. Thomas's eyes widened with excitement at this unexpected opportunity. He had heard stories about the guild archives, but had never imagined he might be allowed to examine such precious documents. "I would be honored, Master Geoffrey," he said, trying to keep his voice calm despite his enthusiasm. "Will Master Edmund be coming as well?" "Of course," Master Edmund replied. "This kind of historical research is an important part of any craftsman's education. By understanding how our predecessors solved similar problems, we can build upon their wisdom while adding our own innovations." After a quick breakfast, the three of them made their way through the morning streets to the impressive stone building that housed the Stonemasons Guild. Thomas had passed this building many times, but had never been inside, and he was amazed by the soaring stone arches and intricate carved details that decorated every surface. The morning light streaming through tall windows created patterns of light and shadow that seemed to bring the stone carvings to life. The guild archives were located in a special chamber designed to protect precious documents from moisture, fire, and other threats. Thick stone walls kept the temperature constant, while carefully positioned windows provided steady, indirect light perfect for detailed work. Wooden cases lined the walls, each containing rolled parchments, bound volumes, and carefully preserved drawings that represented centuries of accumulated knowledge. Master Geoffrey led them to a particular case and withdrew several documents related to chapel construction projects from decades past. As he unrolled the first parchment on a large wooden table, Thomas gasped at the beauty and precision of the drawings. Every detail had been recorded with meticulous care: architectural plans, decorative elements, and even notes about specific techniques and materials. This chapel was built about 60 years ago in a town 2 days' journey from here, Master Geoffrey explained, pointing to various elements of the design. Notice how the craftsmen of that era approached the integration of stone and wood elements. The wooden panels were designed not just to be beautiful in themselves, but to complement and enhance the stone carvings around them. Thomas studied the drawings intently, marveling at the sophisticated understanding of proportion and harmony they revealed. The medieval craftsman had possessed an intuitive grasp of how different materials and techniques could work together to create unified works of art. He could see clear connections between these historical approaches and the methods Master Edmund was using for their current project. "Look at this detail," Master Edmund said, pointing to a section of the drawing that showed carved wooden vines intertwining with stone columns. The woodworker had to understand not just his own craft, but also the properties and limitations of the stonework. This kind of collaboration between guilds required extensive communication and mutual respect. As they continued examining the historical documents, Thomas began to understand that the guild system was not just about organizing individual crafts, but about fostering collaboration and shared knowledge across different specialties. The most ambitious projects required multiple guilds working together, each contributing their unique skills while maintaining a unified vision of the final result. This is exactly why we wanted you to see these archives, Master Geoffrey said, apparently reading Thomas's thoughts. Too often, young craftsmen focus so intently on mastering their own techniques that they forget how their work fits into larger projects and broader communities. Understanding these connections is essential for anyone who aspires to true mastery. They spent the entire morning in the archives, examining documents from different eras and different types of projects. Thomas saw plans for great halls, market squares, bridges, and even entire towns that had been designed and built through the coordinated efforts of multiple guilds. Each document told a story not just of technical achievement, but of human cooperation and shared dedication to creating beauty and function. One document particularly captured Thomas's imagination, a detailed account of a young apprentice from over a century ago who had made significant contributions to a major cathedral project. The apprentice, named Martin, had started much as Thomas was starting, with simple tasks like carving decorative elements. But over time, his skill and dedication had earned him increasing responsibility until he was eventually trusted with some of the most important and visible aspects of the work. What happened to Martin after the cathedral was finished? Thomas asked, fascinated by this historical parallel to his own situation. Master Geoffrey smiled and pulled out another document. Martin eventually became a master craftsman and established his own workshop. But more importantly, he became known as someone who could coordinate complex projects involving multiple guilds. His understanding of how different crafts complemented each other made him invaluable for major commissions. He lived a long, successful life and trained dozens of apprentices who carried on his traditions. Thomas felt inspired by Martin's story, seeing it as a possible glimpse of his own future if he continued to work hard and remain open to learning. The idea of becoming someone who could help coordinate complex projects appealed to him, as it would allow him to contribute not just his individual skills, but his understanding of how different crafts could work together harmoniously. As they prepared to return to the carpenter's workshop for the afternoon's work, Master Geoffrey made an unexpected announcement. Based on what I've seen of your work and your understanding of these historical examples, I would like to invite you to visit our stone carving workshop later this week. We're beginning work on the altar pieces that will complement your wooden panels, and I think you would benefit from seeing how we approach our part of the project. Thomas was thrilled by this invitation, understanding that it represented a significant honor and an unusual opportunity for an apprentice. Most apprentices learned only their own craft during their training period, with broader education coming later, if at all. To be included in the planning and execution of a multi-guild project at such an early stage of his development was both exciting and humbling. The afternoon in the carpenter's workshop passed quickly as Thomas applied his morning's insights to his continued work on the chapel panels. His understanding of how the wooden elements would relate to the stone components helped him refine his approach to the carving, thinking not just about individual leaves and branches, but about how they would contribute to the overall visual harmony of the completed chapel. Master Edmund worked nearby, occasionally offering guidance, but mostly allowing Thomas to explore the implications of what he had learned in the archives. The quality of Thomas's work continued to improve as his understanding deepened, each new leaf showing greater sophistication in both technique and artistic vision. Your work is developing a maturity that goes beyond mere technical skill, Master Edmund observed as he examined Thomas's latest carvings. You're beginning to think like a true craftsman, considering not just how to execute individual elements, but how those elements serve the larger purpose of the work. As evening approached and they began their familiar routine of cleaning and organizing the workshop, Thomas reflected on how much his understanding had grown over the course of just 2 days. He had advanced technically, certainly, but more importantly, he had begun to grasp the deeper principles that guided master craftsmen in their work. The interconnectedness of the guild system, the importance of historical knowledge, the value of collaboration across different specialties, all of these insights would shape his approach to craftsmanship for years to come. The evening meal was a celebration of sorts, with Goodwife Margaret preparing a special feast to honor Thomas's invitation to visit the Stonemasons Guild. She had somehow managed to obtain fresh trout from the local stream, which she prepared with herbs from her garden and accompanied with new potatoes and early peas. The meal was a reminder that their small community was blessed with abundance, and that this abundance was the result of everyone's diligent work. "I'm so proud of your progress, Thomas," Margaret said as they shared the delicious meal. "When you first arrived here, you were a shy boy who barely knew how to hold a chisel properly. Now you're being invited to participate in major guild projects and study historical archives. Your parents would be so proud if they could see how you've grown." Thomas felt a warm glow of gratitude for the family that had adopted him and supported his development. Master Edmund and good wife Margaret had provided not just technical training, but also wisdom, encouragement, and unconditional support. He understood that this kind of mentorship was a precious gift that he would someday be responsible for passing on to future apprentices. As they sat by the fireplace after dinner, Master Edmund continued work on his small wooden bird while sharing more stories from his own apprenticeship and early career. These stories had taken on new meaning for Thomas after his morning in the archives, as he could now see how they fit into the larger patterns of guild tradition and craft development. Every craftsman's journey is unique, Master Edmund said as he added tiny details to the bird's tail feathers. But there are certain experiences that we all share. The first time you successfully complete a difficult technique, the first time a client praises your work, the first time you teach something to a younger apprentice, these moments create bonds that connect all craftsmen across time and distance. Thomas nodded, understanding that he was in the process of accumulating his own collection of such defining moments. Today's invitation to study the archives and visit the Stonemasons Guild would certainly become one of those memories that he would treasure throughout his career. As he climbed to his loft for the night, Thomas felt that he was no longer quite the same person who had awakened that morning. His understanding of his craft, his community, and his place in the larger world had deepened significantly. He was beginning to see himself not just as someone learning to work with wood, but as someone being prepared to contribute to the ongoing tradition of creating beauty and meaning through skilled handwork. The wooden bird that Master Edmund was carving had become a symbol for Thomas of the kind of craftsman he hoped to become, someone who could bring life and beauty to raw materials through patience, skill, and deep understanding of his craft. As he settled into his comfortable bed, Thomas offered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the opportunities he had been given and the people who had supported his journey. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to grow, but tonight he could rest peacefully, knowing that he was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by people who cared for him and engaged in work that brought meaning and beauty to the world. The circle of learning, creating, and sharing that defined the guild system had welcomed him as a full participant, and he was eager to prove himself worthy of that trust. In his dreams that night, Thomas saw himself many years in the future, standing in a workshop much like Master Edmund's, guiding the hands of a young apprentice who was just beginning to discover the joy and satisfaction of bringing wood to life through patient, skillful work. The cycle would continue, as it had for generations before and would for generations to come, each craftsman adding his own contributions to the great ongoing conversation between human creativity and the natural world. And in that vision, Thomas understood that he had found not just a trade, but a calling, a way of life that would bring him fulfillment, purpose, and the deep satisfaction that comes from creating beauty and serving his community through the work of his hands and the wisdom of his heart. The young apprentice's journey was far from over, but he was no longer walking the path alone. He was part of something larger and more enduring than any individual life, the great tradition of craftsmanship that connected past, present, and future in an unbroken chain of skill, knowledge, and love. With these peaceful thoughts filling his mind, Thomas drifted into deep restorative sleep, ready to embrace whatever tomorrow might bring to his continuing adventure as a young craftsman in the medieval world of guilds, community, and the timeless satisfaction of work well done.